The man we're after is named Frederick Gorgoat, birth name Kino Holzer Gorgoat, although he is better known by his alias, Forensic. Lance began as he paced around the table the rest of us were seated at. The storied nature of his crime and capabilities are in the document uncovered by Vivian, the writings of Gerasim Yakovlev. "What's on your mind, Cullen?" Lance asked, noticing my hand had been raised. "Yeah, just really quick. Were we supposed to read the whole thing? Because that shit was wicked long, and not a lot of it seemed relevant to our mission. Like, most of it is just about this dumb kid's puppet show this guy apparently made like a zillion years ago." Lance sighed as heavily as I imagined he might. "Well, fortunately for you, the report was merely context for the following information. The last known report we have on Forensic indicates that Yakovlev destroyed all traces of Happy Appy, the television series erstwhile mentioned by our new friend Cullen. Forensic, however, appears to remain on the move. We attempted to establish contact with Yakovlev, but he has remained unresponsive. Fortunately, we managed to pinpoint Forensic's whereabouts and recent activity. He is currently operating out of an abandoned cabin in the woods of York, Maine, having assumed the identity of a door-to-door meat salesman. If there are no further questions, I would suggest we get a move on." We were off shortly after that briefing. When we reached the surface, Lance, Ivar, and Vivian departed for a large van. I attempted to follow, only for my shoulder to be gripped from behind by Duncan. Although he applied the usual amount of pressure, I felt no pain at all. "I figured it'd be best if you and I rode together to clear the air a bit, old son," he said before I turned to face him. "A freshly roided rookie is still a rookie, after all." I nodded in agreement, and soon we were off in Duncan's Jag, tailing the van ahead. "Must be nice to finally get some sun, hey kid?" he asked after a long silence. "Oh, indeed, my lord. How gracious of you to finally allow me to leave the reinforced steel bunker you've held me in against my will, now that you've finally pumped me full of whatever the fuck that was," I replied, feeling a bit more bold than usual, restrained only by my desire for frank clarity in speech. "They're still hung up on that, huh?" I didn't reply. He was right, and I didn't really feel the need to justify myself right then and there. "Good," he finally said. "Honestly, I'd be more worried if you weren't. And don't get me wrong, Lance is my brother, but if it were up to him, he'd have a team of nothing but robots programmed to tickle his balls. Even back in our days with the Shrieking Devils, it was pretty clear that I was the one with his head in the clouds and he was the one with his nose to the ground. He's great at knowing what's needed and keeping people in line. All I do is come up with all the great ideas, so I try to pick up the slack and focus on things he can't quantify. Like, for instance, knowing where you guys' heads are at. I tried my best to listen, but Duncan's mention of the Shrieking Devils rocked me. For those of you who aren't in the know about contemporary military history, the Shrieking Devils are a since-disbanded company of the United States Marine Corps. It's sort of an open secret that they were basically the military's go-to anytime they wanted to go scorched earth on the enemy. Eventually, as people began to find out about it, all of the higher-ranking officers of the unit were tried and eventually executed for crimes against peace, grand larceny, racketeering, and extortion. Basically, all the guys Lance Corporal or below were spared of any legal repercussions due to having apparently acted under duress. This would later prove to have been a bit dubious, given that shortly after the verdict was levied, they all grouped together to form Shrieking Devils Strike Force, Inc., a private military contractor, allowing them to act as soldiers of fortune for a number of years, operating ruthlessly throughout the world at the behest of the highest bidder. For a long time they did rather well until the company's sudden and mysterious dissolution and sale to a Japanese kitchen appliance firm. Anyway, the point is, I hope you know this is nothing more than you repaying a life debt. We could have easily hung you high and dry with clockwork. Hell, might have been easier given how willing those rent-a-cops were to believe the story they made up about you. But I took a chance on you, old son. For what it's worth, I'll never insult you by insisting on your gratitude. I made a choice for you that should have been yours. I just wanted you to be aware of the transactional nature of it all. In essence, I dragged you into the fold against your kicking, blubbering will, because I could, and I wanted to. That's just kind of how the world works, you know? But things will be a little bit different from now on. You and I are bonded by the blood of abominations, which means we are sworn to die for one another, and only for one another. You're not talking about the Cronenberg serum when you say that, are you? I barely managed to choke out. You're pretty quick, lad, Duncan began. When we joined blood the other night, you weren't just bonded to us goofballs. You were bonded to the Sisters of Dark Purgation from Vivian's boarding school days, and to Ivar's Berserker band, and on account of Lance and I, to every man who ever belonged to the Shrieking Devils. Each of those groups did happen to have a blood pact of some kind. We settled on the one we used in the Shrieking Devils because those among the Sisters and the Berserker band were both the cub and the father's porridge, respectively, if you know what I mean. Duncan chuckled a bit when I reflexively looked in horror at the scar on my wrist. Actually, this all kind of relates back to what I was talking about earlier. See, we were never really able to hit our stride as a marine company looking back. The top brass were a rogues gallery of chicken hawk Fauntleroys who only recruited us because they could leverage our criminal records against us to compel us to do things far too dirty for their soft, virginal, delicate hands. We were only able to get our act together after Lance founded the strike force. But after we'd all gotten fatter and happier, Lance saw it prudent that we expand. All the while we were spread way too thin, and every guy wanted to be the king of his respective shit pile. Wasn't long before they all started going after each other's shit piles, especially the really big ones Lance and I had. Duncan sighed as if he were reminiscing on bygone good times. Isn't it funny how that works? Right after we carved out more of this earth for ourselves than we knew what to do with, we actually did kill one another, down to the last few men. I'm trying to keep things in perspective now that I'm the one in charge. It's all different this time. These days, we just go after those that are bigger pieces of shit than we are. It's kind of the only way I can make up for anything else. You never thought to just retire with all that plunder? I asked. Not once, Duncan said. I'm kind of like a mantis shrimp in that way. If I don't have something to break in front of me, I'll probably just die. Especially since I don't really have anything to live for anymore. I thought to ask him to elaborate, but he cut me off with a question I hadn't been expecting. What about you, Cullen? You got anything to live for? What do you mean? I asked. Well, having something you intend to die for is pretty fucking stupid, I always thought. I mean, the reason you fight is because you want to live, right? But why live in the first place? Honestly, the only thing that really matters to me at the end of the day is making sure that my family is okay. I guess I like the idea of being a noble patriarch, you know? Have kids, raise them well, leave a decent legacy behind. That's basically it. Duncan nodded silently. Well, it's good to have at least one normal guy around here, he said as he patted me on the shoulder. After that, we mostly drove in silence. Upon waking from the road nap I had taken, I saw that we had arrived at a small cabin house on a secluded gravel path. surrounded by the thick forests of Maine.